My name is Neil McCullough. I'm the Executive Director of the Corcoran Center for Real Estate and Urban Action. We're now in our 9th year on campus, and we're really excited to finally be trying to engage TREC, the Real Estate Council of Boston College, alumni. And so we have a few members of TREC here tonight, and it's been a couple years coming. This year, we actually were able to have 10 students invited to a TREC event downtown, and now in this semester, we're trying to do a cross-programmed event with alumni and students. So we're excited to be making that happen. Hopefully we can do that again and a little bit bigger and broader next year over the entire semester. With no further ado, I'd like to welcome Jarvis Gooseby, who's a BC junior and a former or a Corcoran Center internship alum. We're happy to have him as our moderator tonight. Mike Nichols from the Boston BID and Joe Larkin from MP Boston for our first panel, Cities Reimagining Downtowns.
All right, hello everyone and welcome to our panel today. We're going to be talking about the changing of downtown in Boston. I'm joined here with two very praised and highly astute professionals in the field, and so we're going to keep this conversation really open, and so if you guys have any questions, please let us know. And we'll be able to pass the mic around so we can hear you. But I just wanted both of the professionals, both Joe and Mike, to go through and talk about their job, their role currently, and we'll get the conversation going.
So I'm Michael Nichols. I'm the president of the Downtown Boston BID, which is the Business Improvement District in downtown Boston. Are you guys familiar with what BIDs are? Imagine some are, some not. They're sort of these convoluted structures that have now emerged around the country to help try to bring an added level of service to an urban area, typically a neighborhood, beyond the capability or capacity or willingness of a city. And so New York City has like 74 BIDs. The entire city, when you look at a map of BIDs in New York City, you see a quilt. The most sort of prominent you might be familiar with is the Times Square Alliance. You travel around the rest of the country in the Chicago Loop Alliance, Downtown Denver Partnership, the Fashion District in LA. A lot of these really vibrant urban areas have developed nonprofit organizations like ours that are typically funded most, if not entirely, by the commercial property owners within a defined area, and we try to bring added services to that area. Anything from programming and public art to trash removal, graffiti removal, to you name it, a number of collection of services where we try to help an area feel safer, feel more vibrant, feel cleaner, feel more approaching, to the benefit, hopefully, of those business owners and of everybody else that spends time within that urban area. And so these organizations are created. They're typically around for a certain amount of time, and if the owners like what they see with the organization, then they keep it going. And I've just recently, myself, taken over the Downtown Boston BID. We are one of the 20 or 25 largest BIDs in the country in terms of budget, in terms of the sort of area that we manage. Myself, I'm a lawyer by background. I was in government service for many years, but now I'm in my 9th year of working in nonprofits in downtown Boston, trying to sort of blend the experience I had in government and in law with the needs of at this time downtown Boston and how to make it better for all of us. So I'm excited about that work and to talk to you about it today.
Thanks, Michael. I'm Joe Larkin. I'm a principal at Millennium Partners, or MP Boston. We are a private developer focusing mostly in downtown Boston. In fact, if you even go to the Back Bay, that might as well be Minnesota, as far as I'm concerned, like this. It's a 10-block area, pretty much, that we focus on. We've done 10 projects in that area, worth today over $5 billion. They're mixed-use projects. We started in an area that was formerly called the Combat Zone, if anyone remembers what that might have been. It was a tough part of town. Like this was kind of a little bit of an abandoned part of the downtown Boston area, and we've progressed from one project to the next. We're big believers in that. Downtown, we think there's opportunities there. We also think there's challenges, and we're all in.
So before we get started on talking about the changing of downtown, I think it's important to talk about the importance of downtown and how vital it is to the city and to the state and just to communities all over the country.
Sure. There's no area of Massachusetts that has a higher concentration of jobs than the downtown Boston area. So within the 34-block area that we consider the BID district, That includes the vast majority of the financial district, along with Downtown Crossing, part of the theater district, part of Government Center. And so it's the highest concentration of jobs. Disproportionately, those jobs tend to be white collar in financial services and a number of sort of ancillary fields. Increasingly now, biomedical research, green jobs, and green technologies. And so, a lot of the innovation that's happening in Boston, a lot of the wealth that goes into paying sort of the property taxes that the city of Boston relies upon for all of the city services that the city provides anywhere in the city are disproportionately being generated downtown. And so it's our employment sector. It's the reason why Downtown Crossing is the literal intersection of all the subway systems in Boston, because they wanted to get people to and from that area for work and to create the kind of economic impact that Boston and Massachusetts more broadly relies upon.
Great. And as far as I'm concerned, when I think about downtowns, I think of the heart or the center. Okay, a cultural center, the most important part, things along those lines. Think about, I don't know where you all come from or anything along those lines here like this, but think of those places where you grew up. Okay, those places that are very special, those places that are on campus that are very special, the things that sort of where you meet others. Okay, where you connect. Things like that. And think about those places in those towns if you're in an area that is at a depressed downtown, how sad it makes you feel, okay? How it doesn't make you feel very good. That's really what downtown is. It's something to take pride in. It's something to worry about, okay, like this. It's really the kind of place that you can take advantage of, okay, in a positive way. And it's a place where if you tap into it correctly, you can get an enrichment in your life. Like that. That's what we're trying to tap into, and and some of the reasons why you guys came to BC and things along those lines. And Jarvis, you coming all the way, from Texas. Why did you come here like this? And what is it that you're finding here? Okay, and what are you missing? What did you miss when you guys were all doing remote? Okay, those are the kind of things that make downtowns really, really work, and it's our job collectively to sort of tap into it.
You kind of spoke about how people feel when they're downtown. And the feeling of just belonging downtown. Can you talk a little bit about how you make downtown more inclusive to different cultures, people from different backgrounds? How can you make downtown more appealing to them?
So, how many here would consider themselves original Bostonians? So, a few. So you might know this answer. Bostonians are separate, okay? We tend to sort of stay separate. And Jarvis's question is the crux, okay, of what makes a great city. Like here, how can we make these places comfortable, inviting, like this? And how do we do it in a way that's sort of, how can I call it? Not because we're supposed to, okay? So if it's not because we're just, we're a diverse culture, we should become more diverse. So you get up in the morning, you become more diverse. That's not going to do it. What happens is you've got to buy into why a diverse community, whether it's people with disabilities, with people of different colors, okay, different religions, different socioeconomic basis. I mean, I have a Ritz-Carlton right next to the St. Francis House, homeless shelter, okay, like this. The idea is to embrace each other and to do it for the betterment of everybody. And as long as you guys are entering this issue of making a downtown or making a more inclusive kind of place as a responsibility or things that people of means need to do for people of without means, okay, like this, you're missing it, okay? What you really have to do is change the hearts and minds that starts inside you, so that there's a better purpose, a more important purpose, okay? And quite frankly, we hope, in our case, a better downtown.
Yeah, I mean, I know this will shock you, but downtown Boston does not look the same way today that it did 300 years ago. So it's a made place. Downtown Boston is a series of conscious decisions that people made, governments made, developers made, residents made, banks made, lenders. I mean, generations of decisions were made, but who made those decisions? Disproportionately, those decisions in Boston were made by wealthier white men over generations who made decisions for what downtown Boston would be for everyone. And I think we're starting to finally see in our city that the barrier to entry for those making some of those decisions is reducing. And it's still not equitable. It's still not a neighborhood or a city that reflects its diversity. The city is now a majority minority city. More than 50% of the people live in Boston are people of color, are BIPOC communities that don't represent necessarily the owner community downtown, the business owner community, but it does get a lot closer to representing who is downtown, to Joe's point, that we have developed a neighborhood that more than maybe anywhere else in Boston is welcoming today, regardless of socioeconomic standing or how you got there or why you're there. Mid-market retail, jobs at various points in the income spectrum, public art opportunities, musical performing opportunities, things that the BID is catalyzing, and bringing an equity to how we make access to space available. And so there's a lot of conscious decisions that formed the downtown Boston of today, and then increasingly, I think, to Jarvis's question, we need to be much more conscious of in both building back from the pandemic and providing more opportunities going forward that make Boston more equitable than the one that was created, ahead of us.
Mike, you kind of spoke about earlier your job at BID and how you want to connect with local businesses and the downtown. What are some strategies you can use or you have used to facilitate that connection between businesses downtown and local organizations?
Yeah, I actually am probably one of the few people, and I think Joe sees some of these upsides too, but I'm one of the few people that really views the pandemic as a positive for downtown Boston. We have one of our highest rates of retail vacancy downtown that we've perhaps ever had. But with that comes a real opportunity to build it back as something that is better reflective of the city that surrounds us. And so the city of Boston just recently launched a $9 million fund called their SPACE grant program. SPACE is an acronym for something. Supporting pandemic-affected community enterprises. Don't look that up, I may be wrong. And what that's actually doing is trying to support small business owners, disproportionately those who are people of color or from immigrant communities who've not traditionally had an opportunity to develop a business downtown, and trying to lower the threshold to entry by providing up to $200,000 grants over 3 years to help start a business downtown. Rent subsidies, security deposit subsidies for the build out of that space. And the BID could have sat back and watched and seen who accessed that money. But instead, we developed a program to actually try and market that program in communities of color around Boston to successful businesses who could potentially be interested in either relocating a business or opening a second business in downtown Boston, so that what you would see on the streets visiting our neighborhood is a retail supply or art galleries or food and beverage offerings that better reflect the diversity and energy of Boston's neighborhoods. Because what is a great central business district if it isn't the microcosm of the city that it serves? And so, we don't want you necessarily having to go out into the neighborhoods of Boston to experience the real Boston. We want you to both be able to do that and to visit downtown and see a collection of the energy that is really driving economic impact and livelihoods changing and wealth building happening in the neighborhoods of Boston. And so we believe that the BID can play a role in that, and so we're getting a lot more proactive about that work. The deadline for that program is this Friday, and we've already got about 30 businesses that have applied interested in specifically downtown Boston. We expect to have probably another dozen or more by the end of the week. And then over the next 6 months, we'll be working with them, whether they qualify for that grant program or not, to access vacant retail storefronts in downtown Boston, which makes our neighborhood safer, more eclectic, more interesting for tourists and for locals, and we think better reflective of the city that we serve.
Mike kind of talked about already the positive impacts of COVID on downtown development. Could you talk about the negative impacts of COVID on development?
I've got a project that's costing us $1.4 billion right now, okay? And on the day that we shut down the construction site on our site here like this, my bank left that same time like this. So I was into it for $500 million of our own cash like this. It's tangible, it's real, okay? Wasn't sure it was coming back. We were the kinds of people that were faced with a question about how are we going to replace that debt, okay, or wait for another day like this. That was a gut-wrenching decision. The potential value, okay, Michael talks about it as an opportunity, and it is an opportunity in many regards. It's also potentially really rough on people who are long in or have a lot of money into this particular area here like this, because things have changed. You don't want transitions of this level, okay, to happen at exactly the wrong time. I have here at the same time, I've got 812,000 square feet of office space that I have to find customers for. So that's 4,000 individuals that are coming to work every day. So I need people who are deciding to come to work. Okay, in this building that I'm creating, I have 317 places to live. I need 317 families to come in here like this. I've got a big connector coming through here across the board. I need those people to embrace downtown Boston. Okay, these are challenges that are driven and were precipitated by COVID. Okay, this is the 10th project, as I said before. I thought it would be a continuation of our prior 9, like this, little bit of upside, little bit of downside, make it through, normal business kinds of risks and things along those lines. Boom. It's not like that, okay? It really is not like that, okay? I have a project that is lucky enough for us. We spend a lot of time with forward-thinking folks, okay, about what is it that people in the future are going to want, okay, in office space, okay? Thank God we did this, okay, like this, because some of the ideas we have here are so spot on, I can't believe it. Last year, the downtown Boston market had a net absorption, okay, of minus 1.8 million square feet. So you lost, okay? So lost 1.8 million square feet. Of my 812,000 square feet, okay, I had a positive absorption of just under 300,000 square feet, okay, like this. And I've got more customers coming behind there, like this. So there's a game of winners and losers, and I hope to be a winning building. But my Lord, COVID is rough.
And you know, Jarvis, even to balance what I said, I mean, I think part of my job is to project optimism for downtown Boston. But to Joe's point, you know, not only did a project of his scale experience that, but those 90 or 100 retail vacancies came from mom and pop businesses that couldn't make it through the pandemic. And so, you know, there's a lot of hardship that's been experienced in downtown Boston and beyond over these last 3 years. And so, you know, both you know, the timing of when I'm coming into this organization, and I think my personal disposition is I'm looking forward, right? I think we have a problem to address today, but it's not without some really significant pain that's been experienced over these last few years.
And quite frankly, we as property owners in the area here, like this, we're looking for somebody who, like Michael, okay? And we found somebody like Michael who has the ability to see things in ways that we weren't expecting, like this. So he's part of our solution, okay? We hope it works.
Me too, right?
Like that, exactly.
So with COVID, we saw a lot of offices and companies moving more to remote spaces, and a lot of businesses just seeing that they don't have to have as many people in the office as they thought. And so with that, you talked about the net absorption and just how there's a lot more space available in that industry. What is some of the shifts and trends you've started to see as companies start to see that they don't need as many people in the office and office space is kind of going down?
Really unhappy young people. You know, if I probably had one message for you today, I think it would probably be, do not let yourself work from your couch. It sounds really attractive. You will be the first generation that I think enters the workforce and has real options on how you work, when you work, where you work. With that will come power. It's a really interesting generation that you're a part of that will be entering the workforce. However, those who are maybe just one generation ahead of you, the ones that I'm talking to, are frustrated that they can't grab their mentor for coffee on the average Wednesday afternoon, and that they don't get to go out with their colleagues at various ages on Thursday night for drinks at 5 o'clock. And so it's great that you get to watch your dog yawn all day long while you work from home. There is some power to that, and I would say the ability to have that measure of flexibility will continue to endure as part of the workforce going forward. But boy, I wouldn't settle into more than a day or so out of an office or out of an environment, a day or so a week, where you are not allowing yourself to be within the mix of innovation, of ideas, of exposure to leaders within a firm, to exposure to your colleagues, to the opportunity to pull people aside and talk about the path you're on and the path forward. It might sound really exciting to work for a Denver or Boston-based job from a bungalow in San Diego when you go surfing at the end of the day. That's what vacation time's for. I'm not that old, not that young, but not that old. So I've kind of gotten to span this a little bit. But I think one of the things we're starting to see is companies are still in the process of bringing people back to downtown offices, to setting expectations where they're in the office 3 or 4 days a week. We have not yet hit an equilibrium of how much people will be back in the office. And I listened in on a panel just a couple of weeks ago where folks like me were talking about, agonizing over how do you get people back to downtown offices, and that the value of being in a downtown work environment and an in-person work environment is so strong that companies already recognize what they're missing by people being home. How do we get people to do that? And the woman from New York City, without missing a beat, her very first answer was layoffs. The companies will probably in the future come to lay off the folks that don't want to be in the office more often and focus on the ones that do. And that doesn't mean that you won't still retain some measure of flexibility in the future. But I think you should find the balance that allows you to move forward in your career and access leaders within an environment that you work in. And that will not happen on a 60-minute Zoom. And so you should be seeking out those opportunities in your internships. If somebody says you can work from home 2 or 3 days a week, but they allow you to be in the office for 5, I'd think really long and hard about working from home in an internship or working from home in an entry-level job. Because the best way that you're going to move up within a company is not just the proficiency of the work you're doing, but the access and the relationships that you build with people who have power within that organization.
And as office space and residential, I kind of want to shift a little bit and talk more about residential because the BPDA has talked a lot about the convertibility ratio and trying to bring more people to live in downtown. Can we talk a little bit about how to get increase residential spaces downtown as office spaces kind of decrease?
Yeah, so there's a theory out there that says, go where the customers are, and so whether they're lab or commercial office or residential, there's a basic fundamental that you have to start with, right? It's just like you can't play baseball on a football field, okay, like this. You can't always put residential in an office building like this. And so you have to, so what the BPDA is really searching for right now is where are those opportunities, okay? And it's really pretty simple, okay? If you're more than 42 feet away from a window, here like this, that's not a very good residential building, like that. If you are, and you can do that in a commercial building here, like this. I think what people are trying to get at, and I have a building, quite frankly, that has commercial on the first floor and residential above. Here, like this, 2 completely different building forms. And if you happen to go down to downtown Boston, or even sometimes from the Heights, you can actually see the top. You can see the residential portion. What you really understand is that it's the mixed-use nature of good communities that really create really nice downtowns. Like this, you have people that take a real ownership interest in their downtown in a real interesting way. So how do I bring more people to the downtown Boston area here? Continue to make it a really good community. Like this, we've brought in, and this is 317 now, this will be 2,000 different apartments that we've brought in to this downtown area here like this because they like the arts, they like the cacophony of people, okay? They like everything. Don't get lost in the idea of, oh my Lord, we got to convert this particular office building if it's not convertible. That landlord, okay, has all the incentives in the world to figure that out. The government or the public sector doesn't have to tell them, okay? They just make the facilities available for them so that if somebody says, my building, I really think can go to commercial, can go to residential, will you allow for it? Government should say yes, and they are saying yes, okay? But you can't impose, okay, things on a property owner right now, given the other obstacles that are currently in the way. Vacant parcels, okay, incentives, things along those lines. It all starts with it has to be with the right building form to start.
And that's a good segue. I was going to go to incentives, right? The Boston Planning and Development Agency right now is considering for downtown specifically a new planning effort called Plan Downtown that would actually create residential density incentives. That sounds like a phenomenal idea. If you want more residential downtown and there's an area that is an empty lot or ripe for redevelopment, possibly for conversion, make it more attractive to someone to build residential. Allow them to have more density or more height if they will prioritize the addition of residential units downtown. I think that's one major thing that could happen. I agree with everything Joe said. Second. And third, I would say the other best way that we can get residential density downtown is by build it literally anywhere that the T services. Yeah. It doesn't have to be downtown. It has to be proximate to downtown for it to have the impact on downtown that we need. And so we would love to, in the bid and others, and Joe's energy, to bring 2,000 residences downtown that wasn't here 15 years ago.
Right.
I mean, I moved to the city 15 years ago, and I'm not sure Millennium had residences there just yet.
We did. Where were you?
Couple, right? But that the vast majority of that 2,000, right's come in these last 15 years. And so it's a relatively new phenomenon that Millennium, more than anyone, has incentivized people to want to live downtown by developing appropriate units with amenities and mixed-use buildings that are attractive and interesting to live downtown. Therefore, the neighborhood got safer. Therefore, more people wanted to work and live downtown, but you could also have them a T ride away. And I've lived for the last 12 years in the Fenway, about midway between this campus and downtown, where I've had nothing but Green Line rides my entire last 12 years of my career to work. Mostly that's been a good experience. A reliable transportation system with residential density built along that transportation system is a great way to build the access for people to work and live downtown.
And how do we make sure that there are more affordable options as people continue to want to live downtown, work downtown? How do we make sure there are affordable options for people to explore?
Supply and demand. We've got to continue. I once did an analysis that Boston had something like 700,000 residents 40 years ago, with an average household size of like 2.6. Joe probably knows these numbers better than me. We're now just about back at that same residential number in Boston, but with an average household size of 1.3. So family types are the same. Family types are the different today for the same size population in the city of Boston, which means we need roughly double the number of units that we needed 40 years ago to house the same number of people. And so it really is a supply and demand. We need to figure out how to incentivize real estate development, residential real estate development, and lower the barriers to gaining density in all the appropriate areas where you could find density, which is certainly downtown Boston.
Yeah, and I think it's understanding the relationship with asset classes that have the ability to pay above their costs, and those asset classes that don't have those abilities to pay above their costs, and to connect the two. I mean, the old word used to be linkage, but the idea here that when we sell an apartment, for instance, like sell a condominium and stuff like this, we're going to take $50 a square foot and we put that into a fund for the city that they can then create downtown housing, which we think is going to happen over in the Chinatown location here, like this. It's bringing those connections together, talking to the unions, make sure there's a different wage rate, okay, for when you're building affordable housing, okay, versus when you're building a project like we're building, like this, while at the same time understanding that higher wage rates for laborers and things along those lines is also a public need and an important thing. And when you talk to, hopefully when you see Mr. Jameson this afternoon, it's that balance, it's that tension, okay? It's everybody in the world, everybody in this room is going to say, build more affordable housing that people can afford, okay? And everyone will support that. At the same time, you have to sort of get into the weeds of how to do that, okay? There's a few exceptional professionals, okay, in the city of Boston. There's a woman by the name of Sheila Dillon, for instance, who's probably one of the leading thought leaders on how to do this. She's a big proponent of supply and demand. She's a big proponent of working with different mayors, all three different mayors, about the idea of making sure that the benefits achieved by a city, okay, really go, okay, towards the improvements to the things that are most important to those city leaders and those city residents. But then you lay that into labor rates. You lay that into issues about sustainability. You put that into schools, okay, like this. It's a great job, quite frankly, as a public official to balance through all these sorts of things, okay? And I just want to tell one example of how this is the best experience I ever had, and it's the best thing that happened to me in my whole industry here. I was newly out of UMass, okay? Found a job just by knocking on doors, okay? Quickly got into the real estate business here like this, and then just by luck, could have been anything, I then ended up getting into the development business. Soon thereafter, I was on the first project I was working on. I was a caddy, okay, sitting in an office, okay, like this, and the guy that ran my company goes over and says, "Let's go. We're going to go see the mayor, and we're going to talk about a new project that we're going to build on the old Greyhound bus terminal, the dilapidated site in the city of Boston." Here, like this, 10 o'clock in the morning, I get up there. I go there like this. I'm all excited. I got my suit on and tie and stuff like this, and I'm going to go see the mayor. Walked into his office. This man was the smartest, sharpest, okay, most thoughtful person I had, and he gave us this huge hug. Yes, what do you need? Let's do it, okay? I walked out of there, okay? And said to myself, feeling pretty good about myself, okay? Let's just be honest, but maybe I picked the right field. I got lucky. I don't know. I must be pretty, and he's talking right at you and stuff like this. I happened to have that exact same day, I think it was Providence, okay, like this, that exact same day, the Boston Arts Academy, okay, was doing an opening, okay, on their school, the first school in their Fenway, here like this. And I, for some reason, said yes. I was invited to that, and I said, yes, I'll go to that. I sat in the back. Who comes in? Mayor Tom Menino. Okay, at the exact same day, the exact same time, like this, and I saw how he spoke to all those students and all those residents, okay, family of residents, and said, and the love that he showed each one of these persons, and his commitment to social justice, and his commitment to what he was creating here like this. I went back and talked to my wife afterwards, and I said, we don't matter. Okay, and I said that in the most positive way. Our job as an entity is to create the wealth that helps the city do the things that the city really wants to do. And everyone that's ever worked with me, okay, since that point, I always remind them, you're not the shit, okay? What you really are is you're something that has to participate in a larger community. Mayor Menino taught me that in that the same man, 2 hours apart. They're like that.
I wanted both of you all to touch on Mayor Wu's goals for downtown and just what do you see happening and changing with her new administration and with her vision for downtown.
Yeah, there's a phenomenal energy in the city right now. I think hopefully you guys feel it even sort of, at your age, and for those of you that are spending a couple of years here and hopefully a lot longer, that there is a new energy. I mean, this is the first elected non-man as mayor of Boston. This is the first elected non-white person as the mayor of Boston. This is certainly then also the first elected mom as the mayor of Boston. She brings a different prism to this role. And I think for some of us who are transplants, and I didn't grow up in this area, her also not growing up here leaves her less encumbered to, I think, a lot of the older ways that Boston did things. I mentioned some of my earliest remarks, right, that this city was built by those who had power over time, and those who had power over time were disproportionately white, wealthy, male landowning. And so there's a very different energy that's happening in the city today, and I think everybody's still grappling with how best to respond to it, and yet also understanding fundamentally that I think the goals are in the right place, that I think the desire to have us build out public plazas and equitable public spaces while we're building out affordable housing and reliable transportation networks and sustainably built environments, and so much more, that we should be, deriving wealth in the hands of those that haven't traditionally had it, is a call to arms for those of us in the city who are working in development, who are working in public space management, who are working in the places that could allow for some of that progress. And so we at the BID have been extremely motivated by that work. The mayor's office just put out a couple weeks ago an 84-page downtown Boston redevelopment plan that is one of the smartest documents I've read in my career of of a roadmap forward on how you can take a city like Boston and both bounce back from COVID, but also build it better and build it more sustainably, not just from an environmental standpoint, but build it more sustainably and more equitably for the generations that'll follow us. You know, what's happened with COVID is not new to downtown Boston. You know, this area and every other downtown in America has bounced back from war, has bounced back from recession, has bounced back from depression, at times has bounced back from a natural disaster. You know, this isn't new. What caused it is in some ways, but the fact that we've had a something of a reckoning these last 3 years has now created this generation's opportunity to put our stamp on what Boston will be. And I don't think anybody's leading as clearly around here as this mayor is. And I think we're all trying to deliver that vision. And I think it's going to be a great vision for the city for decades to come.
I agree. I agree. She's this, you know, she brings the same approach to sort of making a better city that all good mayors really bring. Here like this, and to see her come from her perspective, different. Okay, little different, a different angle for a different city and a growing city. I think is amazing, and I think anytime you get 5 people in the same room, and if you can have four of those people being of different, you know, come from different histories, different places, and stuff like this, you're going to find, okay, you're going to come up with a better outcome. Like that. There's a little bit of a dialogue going on right now. There's a little bit of, well, that's not how it was in the past kind of stuff here, like that she's facing. God love her. You know, that's exactly the kinds of things that you have to take on and ask people to sort of ask people to aspire to something better. Okay, and that's what she's doing.
Mike, you talked about how the mayor's plan to build back more sustainable downtown is a point of emphasis. In what ways will downtown be impacted by climate change, and how can downtown areas be better equipped to handle those challenges?
So it certainly depends on the downtown you're talking about, and you know, Boston's, you know, we have a bit of a quirk of downtown Boston in that, you know, Boston's a coastal city, and so there's a whole lot about Boston that is vulnerable, and yet our downtown is set a little bit back where a lot of the recent flooding that's been occurring is hitting other neighborhoods, coastal neighborhoods, the Seaport, the Wharf District, and others. And so, you know, but it is now a call to action to develop the types of buildings that will stand the test of time and that will stand this much more uncertain path forward that I think we're experiencing. It is undeniable that we're going to have to start building for a more resilient future, and I don't think there's a better example anywhere than the project that Joe's working on now, which I think, you know, you should detail, you know, all that you put into the project you have now, to say nothing about the others you've worked on. But this one in particular is a hallmark of resiliency, and I think probably is example setting as any project could be in Boston and beyond.
Yeah. So when I talked to you a little bit about, you know, thank God or thank our, whatever who you want to thank about spending
BC. You can thank
BC,
God.
Yeah. Spending so much time, so much time with some very thoughtful leaders, okay, and thoughtful people touring the world. Okay, we created in this building here, and we created it in 2017. We kind of designed this thing, probably the most resilient building, the most energy efficient building that you can possibly build in a cold weather city anywhere in the world. Okay, it costs us a lot of money. That's why some of these customers are coming to us. It's called a Passive House Institute certification here across the board. It basically says every building you see downtown, okay, across the board, the newest LEED certified building that you can possibly point to and look at here like this is going to use 65% more energy to heat and cool that place than our place, like this. It's a fair amount of money. It goes into a fair amount of technology and things along those lines here like this. But it's one of the reasons why customers are coming to us. But more importantly, what it really is, because any one building is not going to really deal with this climate change issue here that we're all facing, but we're becoming an example. Okay, we're showing the world and showing Boston that this can be done. It's now part of the new energy code that says, look, hit the standards of Passive House. We won't tell you to get us a Passive House certification, but hit those standards here like this. And if many buildings, okay, Jarvis is going to go work with a contractor, okay, this summer on his internship, that contractor is trying to go to existing buildings and say, look, use the Passive House Institute's kind of stuff here like this. And so you can then take the part of the environment, a part of the built environment here like this that represents 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions, okay? If you can spend time reducing that, you can then be an example here. That's what our building's all about. It's more than just, it's about being an example and being something that Boston leads the way with.
And in leading the way, I just kind of want to talk about how different Boston's downtown is from other cities and other states across the world, and how it's changing, and just what do you see differently in our downtown than you do in a lot of other places downtown?
You know, the city is fond of a statistic that 1/3 of the people that live in Boston are between the ages of 22 and 34. It's the highest percentage of any major city in the country. We are one of the youngest cities in America, which provides for both the opportunity for rapid change. You know, we have our first millennial mayor right now, and we have that energy, I think, that's coming into the city. The colleges, the schools and colleges, you know, that are located here allows for Boston to have a near limitless supply of talent. You know, every year, you know, around graduation time, that is spilling into our city more than anywhere else in the country. Even some of you go back home, I'll guarantee more of you will stay around here than you thought when you accepted BC's offer your freshman year and came to Boston. People are staying here and providing an opportunity for our city to change rapidly and to accelerate into a new generation of equity and sustainability and openness and access and innovation. And so, you know, some of the greatest companies that exist in the world today were founded in Boston and are continuing to be found in Boston. And disproportionately, that's happening in our downtown neighborhoods. And so I'm excited about seeing that happen here. And believe that will continue to happen for quite some time to come because of our, you know, world-leading hospitals, world-leading academic institutions. Now we have to catch up with some of the other, you know, ingredients. We need to bring attention to things like our struggling transportation system, our high cost of living. Those are opportunities to fix and address the things that might keep someone back from being in Boston. But for me, I think in this country, you know, downtown Boston and Boston as a city stands up to nearly anywhere else in terms of the attractiveness of living here, not just in your 20s, but thereafter. What we have to do, though, is really focus on the things that might hold us back in time, because as I'm sure many of you know, there's been a migration out of these cold weather cities that Joe's talking about. And so disproportionately, people are moving to Austin and Nashville and Phoenix and Scottsdale and other places. Maybe that's climate. I'm not prepared to say it's only climate. I think we have to figure out what makes Boston distinctive, message that to the world, and address our deficiencies with both good public policy and the work that Joe and I are doing in the private sector.
I agree. I mean, Boston we could have picked anywhere in North America to put our investment here. We picked downtown Boston here like this. It punches over its weight across the board. It's the ever changing, starting with 35,000 college graduates that leave every year like this. It's the regeneration, as Michael brings up here like this. It's all the thought leaders. As soon as something gets easy, it leaves and goes somewhere else. The idea that we're used to change. We're used to the idea that we have to be innovative here like this because that's how we survive, okay, as a community. And I think that's our greatest strength. It's also as the world continues to change, we have to always still be appealing, okay, through that change. Okay, we have to be the kind of place where you guys want to stay here like this, because every time 20,000 of you guys leave like this at the end of the year, that's sad. Like this, so we got to provide you that housing. We got to hit the things that really hit you, Jarvis. We want you to stay, okay, here like this. And there's a lot of parts that goes into this whole thing, like this. And that's where Boston has to constantly be appealing.
I just wanted to take a moment and see if there were any questions in the audience. Just raise your hand, and we'll be sure to get a microphone to you.
Hi, my name is Will McLaughlin. I graduated from BC last year, and I wanted to thank you guys both for coming here and speaking to us. This has been really insightful and interesting. One thing that I was wondering is, Mr. Larkin, you spoke on the fact that, well, Boston downtown was seeing a negative net absorption of 1.8 million square feet. Your company was seeing a positive absorption of over 300,000. That's really impressive. What do you think it was about your developments in particular and your projects in particular that really stood out from the rest of the office space, residential in downtown Boston?
Our building is designed to attract talent. And what does talent mean? Okay, and how do companies think about talent? Okay, how do you decide to go to this place? What's your competitive advantage in a place where you're competing for folks? Okay, so for us, it's two things. Okay, location number one, here like this, build something of a high quality, and speak to the essence of why somebody wants to go to work, and understand that many folks are coming from a mission-rich environment. Okay, going to work into a mission drought. Here like this. So part of our building, we didn't pick the most sustainable building in the world for a cold weather city because we're going to save the energy, although that's good, to reduce the greenhouse gases, although that's good. I've got lots of different constituencies to meet, financial people, things along those lines here. Our approach is to sit there and say, no, talented young people want to be part of something bigger, okay? And that's why we did the sustainability approach. That's number one. Number two, we understood that community, people are seeking community across the board. We learned that in our residential building here like this. So we have amenity centers here that are featured, that are bringing people together, that are animated here across the board. And then we spill out, okay, into the streets all around us here like this. And we create something called a connector here like this, which is 240 feet long, okay, 70 feet high. Okay, like this. It's going to be a place where we're literally going to create a board of advisors to ask people to come in here across the board. And companies like McKinsey, okay, who's looking for talent, Cambridge Associates, who's looking for talent all the time, like this, another company, IR&M, they might not know, looking for talent, have all decided that this building is going to be an asset for them to both attract the talent and become more creative when they're in there. It was hard when when it was just us talking, okay? When we got a few more customers around here, it made it felt a lot better.
Great. One more question. A quick question, anyone? So we have 2 minutes.
So you spoke about being a lawyer before you went into real estate. So that's kind of what my dad has done. Can you speak about the like the overlap and maybe about how some of those skills have either translated or some things you've learned?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, I guess I'm at the fringes of real estate, but nonprofit management. I think whatever career you're in, and I think Joe and I share poli-sci as an undergraduate major, right? And that's and Jarvis as well. That's right. And so, those were on ramps into caring about. I think real estate in a lot of ways is caring about the world around you, right? And so is nonprofits. And I think your generation, again, more than most any that came before you, is interested in social impact, both whether for-profits or nonprofits. That's language we didn't talk about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so, for me, I think I've always been someone that's mission-focused. You got to hear certainly about Joe's mission-focused interest in the work that he does tonight. And so for me, I think I went to law school, being mission-focused, but that took me down a government service and ultimately nonprofit service path that I think has acquitted me well in caring about the world that's around me, through these roles and trying to make it better. And I don't, regardless of your background, whether it be law, whether it be real estate, finance, social services, poli-sci, I think there's an opportunity for you in the work that we're both doing to care about that world around you and to make that kind of the hallmark of your work experience.
On behalf of the club and everyone that's here today, we just wanted to say thank you for taking the time out to meet with us today, and we really appreciate both of you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Arthur Jemison's passion for building communities is visible in the career he has built over the past 28 years. Chief Jamison has had a significant impact on communities across Boston, Washington, D.C., and Detroit. At the beginning of his career, Jemison developed experience in city planning, first in the Boston Housing Authority, and then the Boston Redevelopment Authority, and then the City of Washington, D.C., working for the mayor. He returned to Boston to join Massachusetts Port Authority and then worked in the private sector for 7 years. His hard work and reputation earned him his appointment as Deputy Undersecretary and Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development under Governor Deval Patrick. His leadership caught national attention. Detroit Mayor Michael Dugan recruited Jamison to assist in the Housing and Revitalization Department. Unique from his experience in Boston, he was assisting the city as it recovered from bankruptcy. In this role, that was near and dear to him, he contributed to the city's housing transformation by collaborating with developers and securing the city a reallocation grant of $8.9 million from HUD for effectively utilizing prior funding. This experience led him to becoming the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Community Planning and Development for HUD from 2021 to 2022. Jemison returned to Boston to lead the BPDA with the charge of advancing Mayor Wu's vision for creating a plan for more equitable, resilient, transit-oriented, and an affordable city. Mayor Michelle Wu announced this past January the creation of the Boston Planning Advisory Council, PAC, to channel the city's planning and development resources towards Boston's priorities of climate resiliency, equitable growth, and housing affordability. Chief Jemison will lead the integration of the BPDA with the City Planning and Design Department. He will also lead the planning and development team tasked with modernizing zoning, launching a new master plan for civic and green space, and building the nation's first coastal resiliency delivery team. So tonight, Chief Jemison will expand on Boston's planning priorities. It is my great pleasure to introduce Chief Jemison.
So I want to share a few comments and notes tonight on three specific items that you've heard today, and I'd also love to be able to answer any questions you have after I'm done. But specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about blight, decadence, and substandard housing. Those words will make more sense when I begin to describe them in a second. The mayor's desire for us to make sure that the city is ready to host 800,000 people. And then finally, establishing the Planning Advisory Council and a new city planning and design department. I wanted to start with blight, decadence, and substandard housing, because those are the three key words from the city's, from the Redevelopment Authority's charter and from the actual Home Rule petition and the acts of 1960 that created the BPDA. I'll just give a little bit of background on that and then get into a little bit about how we became the BPDA. And so 1950, right after the end of World War II, the city had, at that time, approximately 800,000 inhabitants. But that number was about to be drastically reduced, as it was around the country at that time. Like our post-war story, not unlike many other cities, is one where there was decline and flight. Over the 3 decades between 1950 and 1980, the city's population fell from 800,000 to approximately 500,000. Our competitive advantage, like all cities, is the density of industry services, the labor, and people in close proximity. In the 1950s, that competitive advantage began to deteriorate as the automobile brought people out of the city into the suburbs. And deliberate choices were made in different ways to incentivize that behavior, the highways, the cost of housing, among others. But at the end of the 50s, the situation had grown so acute that the Globe was beginning to write stories about how we were a quote hopeless backwater and worse. At the same time, the theme and trend that American planners working in cities were focusing on were ways to basically compete with what was happening in suburbs. And giants of the profession, like Robert Moses, were proposing parkways and other things that would make cities have some of the same advantages that suburbs did, and this, as opposed to sort of building on some of the key assets and great elements of the cities. This would capture the American imagination, and those ideas became embedded physically into the way that cities looked. But first, in 1957, recognizing this issue, the city of Boston and the state legislature essentially came together to charter a new publicly sponsored enterprise. The BPDA is the result of that. For those who are very into the details, most large cities in the Commonwealth have a redevelopment authority. Most large cities in the Commonwealth also have a planning board. The planning board is the place that projects are approved and deemed fit for construction in the city. The redevelopment authorities were being chartered at that time, and they were designed to give cities the chance to use their powers to give us specific powers to acquire property in the private market like anyone else would, as opposed to having to use procurement laws, to enter into concessionary tax arrangements, effectively provide tax relief and tax incentives, and finally, eminent domain. So those powers are given to redevelopment authorities. So, and then most cities had a staff of people working for the city who would support the work of the planning board or support the work of the redevelopment authority. In the case of Boston, the desire of then Mayor Collins and Ed Logue was to bring all three of those elements together in one agency that was independent from the city. Specifically, to have the redevelopment authority also have the ability to act as the planning board and approve projects, and also have a separate staff from the city who worked at that agency. The charter that was approved in the legislation called for an agency, then the BRA, now the BPDA, to rid the city of blight, decadence, and substandard housing. These phrases were connected to funding sources and legislation at the federal level that was designed to help cities, quote, renew themselves through the use of the capital loans and grants coming from the predecessor of HUD to where appropriate, get rid of substandard housing, to fight what they called decadence at that time, although it's still one of the loosest parts of this definition, and blight, or vacant, abandoned property. City was very much desperate for investment to use the tools that I just described to bring the very best thinking at that time about the way cities could compete with the suburbs to bear. By way of example, it began to target substandard housing. It was believed that the West End at that time was an example of substandard housing. I think today we look back on the West End as a place that both Mel King and Leonard Nimoy of Star Trek fame both grew up. The idea that they both grew up in this neighborhood full of buildings that today we might want to preserve is an indication of the kind of neighborhoods that we lost in the city, and those places were replaced with different kind of housing, sort of a towers in the park approach to housing that was very popular at that time. The planners who conceived these ideas, implemented these programs, all had the very best intentions in most cases, and had exposure to some of the best academic and practical thinking about the field at the time. But at the time, these ideas today would probably seem quite outdated, but they were in many respects trying to do the best with what they learned. But this ended up not just with the elimination of the West End, it also ended up with the elimination of Scholar Square and the construction of City Hall Plaza, and many, many other urban renewal areas around the city where the city, through the BRA, took the initiative to try to create different development conditions in the city. Some of which were very successful, others less so. If we look at any economic statistics about the city, certainly for the last 20 years, the impact of sort of the modern BPDA, BRA, is quite evident. We have begun to have a surge in population relative to the prior years over the last 20 to 30 years. We've seen incredible growth in life sciences, in the financial industry, higher education cluster. These things are some of the strongest, not just in the United States, but in the world. And importantly, what drives that is a highly skilled workforce and an amazingly diverse population and a very high quality of life. While the BPDA's early history and its recent history had a series of successes and some mistakes, there's no doubt that the ability for the planning board, redevelopment authority, and the staff, separate from the city, did absolutely drive forward development in the city and create the conditions I described. But it also left citizens of Boston with, in many cases, a real lack of trust and a deep concern about whether development and planning was designed to help everyday citizens of the city, as opposed to just its business interests. When Michelle Wu was elected, many of you probably know she had written she'd written a long report on ways that she believed that the BPDA needed to be abolished and what it needed to be replaced with. When she took office and then later asked me to join her here, she charged us with not executing exactly what her report said, but something that really spoke to some of the major themes. And again, we've begun to try to shape that over the last year, a lot of which was described in the mayor's recent State of the City speech. But back to white, decadence, and substandard housing. Those certainly describe the challenges of 1960 Boston. And frankly, they've kept us in good stead when we needed to use the special powers of redevelopment over the last 20 years. What they don't do is describe the challenges of the next 60 years. And I think what we've been focused on is identifying new ways to use the same tools to effectuate the changes that we need to effectuate now. Resiliency, the sea level is rising, large swaths of the city are at high risk of flooding. We need to build the physical infrastructure and other infrastructure required to be resilient against those threats. The affordability of our city, writ large, is not just deep restricted affordable housing, it's an adequate supply of housing for people at a range of incomes, which we need to absolutely be focused on. And equity. I think sometimes when people talk about equity, we can miss the forest for the trees. If we're able to get every part of the population of the city to fully realize its potential, because we are taking steps to eliminate the obstacles and wrongs that have impacted many different kinds of people in the city, we have the chance to realize huge potential, both directly and so social capital, but also the wealth of the city. So those three goals are the three things that we try to reorient the use of eminent domain, concessionary tax agreements, and the ability to buy and sell land. We've made those now the reasons and the findings we need to make in order to use those powers. We're going to try to adapt the old tools to the new task. But our vision is to create a city that can adapt to climate change thoughtfully and continue to grow in the way that it has. It's also to, again, address the issues of affordability that threaten our growth and to build the equity we spoke of. I think the mayor's belief is that if we are able to do that, it'll be manifest in the 800,000 Bostonians that live in the city in 2050. We're currently projected to hit 740,000 people in 2030, and we have the chance to reach 800,000 people in 2050. While often, and I appreciate and understand this, mayors have worked hard to try to increase the number of housing units or the number of square feet of new lab or other kinds of commercial growth. The mayor's been very focused on approaching this in a way that embodies that. There's certainly housing goals that we strive for, but really having 800,000 people living in our city, if they continue to reflect the kind of growth, strength, knowledge, innovation that we've had in the city for the last 30 years, we will be a very strong place. And those 800,000 people need a range of things, whether they be transportation or other services to make Boston a sustainable home. So we believe that if we're successful in producing the housing units, we estimate we need approximately 38,000 between now and 2030. We have a place for those folks by increasing our housing production in the city a little bit each year over the next 8 years. We believe we'll be able to host those 740,000 people we need to have in Boston by 2030 to do our leg of the relay. So how are we going to do this? I think the mayor has charged us with two specific kinds of reform. A, we need development to be more predictable and we need the process to be more legible to residents and legible to development interests. It needs to be possible to predict when, how much, when your project approval will be achieved, how much you'll need to spend on mitigating the impact of your project on neighbors, the full range of things that would make doing business here more predictable. We also believe we need to, part of that predictability, it will result in changes in the Article 8 process, through which we use to measure impacts that development has on neighborhoods. Another way that predictability can be built is through the zoning code. City is sort of zoned, sort of down-zoned, so to speak, as we would say in the business. And there's which means each new transaction requires a very boutique negotiation. We strive to have more as-of-right development allowed in the city, specifically of those mixed income, mixed use housing developments that our city needs to reach our goal for population. Another area that the mayor would like to use, the approach the mayor would like to use to sort of further democratize the planning process in the city and help us achieve these goals in a slightly different way, is to take from that triumvirate the board that approves projects, the board that uses special powers like eminent domain, et cetera, to take from that triumvirate the staffing portion and move it over to be under the jurisdiction of the city. As I've mentioned, most major cities in the Commonwealth have the boards I mentioned, but they're staffed by city staff people who are under the oversight of the city council and through its budget allocation powers explicitly. Not projects and other things will not be approved by the council, but by making the staff and the leadership of that staff responsible to the council, we're better able to, in the mayor's view, better able to make sure that there's a democratic, the level of democratic oversight over the work performed by the agency. So those three components I mentioned, changing the charter of the agency through the home rule petition that we filed, focusing on more predictability through improvements to the Article 80 review process through which projects are approved, increasing the amount of as-of-right zoning for the land uses that we need to be successful, and then moving the staff to be under the jurisdiction of the city for more democratic accountability. Those are the techniques through which the mayor's proposed to make her reforms. And so with that background, I think I've given you a full sense of the things we're doing, with one exception that I'll add that's important, which is the addition of a planning advisory council, through which I and my role as chief of planning are going to convene all the other built environment chiefs, so that we are sitting in one room and able to better integrate the plans that are emerging from different departments, so that when I'm speaking to a Mattapan resident, I can not only predict and show them the pipeline for development in my neighborhood, in the neighborhood they live in. I can also show them an estimated time of arrival for their for improvements to the park system in their neighborhood, to improvements to roadways and bicycle ways in their neighborhood. These are the kinds of things we need to be able to provide for citizens that are only going to come from better coordination, not only among the built environment departments, but also with the CFO. CFO support so that capital planning is better connected. So we've been trying to do all those things, while also maintain the pace of development in the city. In particular, although there's been, this year we've not had quite as much approval of housing as we would like, we had very significant growth in the approval of lab space around the city. So we're continuing to see the service of 48 million square foot pipeline of proposed development, including a wide range of great uses that are going to improve neighborhoods for the better. Things like the Harvard Enterprise Research Campus or Channelside at 244 A Street and Fort Point are just a few among the many projects that have been approved. We've got some great stuff on the horizon as well. So we're trying to do a lot here, and hopefully I've given you a a little slice of it. We've hired 30 people in our effort to get fully staffed up, and are excited about the way we're going to be able to engage citizens on some of the reforms we've talked about. So with that, I guess I'll pass it back to Michelle, who I think is our host tonight, and take questions and answers.
Yeah, thank you so much. So does anyone have a question right off the bat? I also have one prepared, but if anyone had one, we can jump right into it. Okay, then I can start out. My question is, in one of our previous panels, we talked about how Boston has a lot of young talent, and I was wondering what your group is doing to include young people in the future of your planning.
So I think it's probably easiest to say that we have we've got a range of positions available at entry levels where you can be part of the planning we're talking about today. I'd also say that we have a Spark Boston program, which is designed to a more like a less, maybe stuffy could be the right word, stuffy environment. Create a situation where you get to interact with planners, get a chance to interact with citizens, and we bring young people together to talk about planning issues that matter. So we do have the Spark Boston program. I think it's on the website, and I encourage people to look out for it.
Yeah, thank you. That's great to hear, especially with a college audience. Does anyone else have any questions?
I have a question about the life science pipeline. A lot of projects have been permitted, but there's reports that a lot of them won't get built because of shrinking demand from life science companies because they're not getting the venture capital funding to grow their companies. So what would be some alternatives for those sites that have been purchased and have been permitted if those buildings don't get built? And how do you see that fitting into the city's vision, which partly is built around the growth of the life science industries as a cluster here?
So the reports of the demise of the life science sector, to me, are maybe it's been stated a little bit too strongly. I think we have always had, unlike some places, a strong life science trajectory. I think it's definitely going to be dampened a little bit. Demand's going to be dampened a little bit, but I think we're going to continue to see growth in that area. I do have some concerns, though, about, I guess what I do want to signal, though, is that the sort of backup use that people typically think about for their commercially permitted property is office, or at least it used to be. I think office is really going through a significant rethinking right now. Because of the way that working from home has really, and the flexibility associated with that has really transformed people's expectations. By way of example, what we are still seeing is brand new office. It's extremely amenitized at the very high end. Is continuing to be built and tenanted. But what we're finding is that in B space and C space, it's just not being occupied anymore, or is out there in subleases that are being, and you get your pick of the litter, so to speak, if you're looking for sublease space right now. So I think the short answer, which I should have started with, is I think there's going to be some dampening of interest in lab space, but I think it's going to level off 3 or 4 years hence from now. You'll see it kind of go back into full equilibrium. But I think the next use of value is office. I think, unfortunately, a lot of our residential prospects have been affected by the bid up of land associated with lab. And I think that's something that's going to take time for the market to adjust.
Thank you.
So what I was wondering is that Boston, like a lot of other major towns in the U.S., is at or near sea level. And I was wondering that how has the BPDA, especially in the near future, but I guess more in the greater future, is dealing with this problem?
How are we dealing with climate change? One more time.
Sorry, with the rising sea levels at or near sea level.
So what we're finding is that we're finding is we have to deal with it a lot of different ways. So the first part is in our review of projects, it's taking the form of enhanced requirements for developers to turn there's a sort of a macro aggregate effect, and then there's sort of a project by project effect. So macro, what we're doing is trying to affect the way the pipeline of development is shaped. So asking development interests to electrify their projects, to sort of move away from fossil fuels, and to reduce the carbon impact of the buildings they're building. That takes the form of things like significantly reduced parking ratios, a wide range of different aspects of the work. The next part, so because that's how we affect the things that are driving climate change come from our energy use. Next, I think to deal with the sort of adaptive side of the work, we're requiring that where people are, at risk of flooding, that we've asked them to berm up or raise the level of the project that they're building. Sometimes we're also asking them to be prepared to have first floors that are that may have flooding. And other ways we're adapting involve like large infrastructure projects such as the one we're pursuing at Mobley Park in Dorchester, where we are taking a large sort of neighborhood, almost regional park next to Carson Beach, and planning to make a major investment that's going to prevent inundation of water from the harbor when tides are high. Over the next, that investment is scheduled to take place over the next few years using capital we're getting from the federal sources to fight this. So those are a few ways that we're adapting to rising sea levels.
How has BPDA struck a balance between developer and planner? And I think it's very well publicized the times that Article 80 reviews restricted developments. Are there good examples of ways how it's helped others?
I think you'd be hard pressed to find a citizen of Boston who doesn't think that. I mean, there are lots of opinions about the agency, but I think only a few of them would say that Article 80 has made development has sufficiently restricted development. They would probably argue that it makes it a little bit harder, but eventually development happens. I think Article 80 today in most neighborhoods is a way that the city is funding a large number of things. So by way of example, when you see a street improvement taking place or a signage improvement or just a wide range of kinds of day-to-day city improvements, you may not know that that it's mitigation agreements with development interests that are causing those streets, sidewalks, signage, and other infrastructure to be built and to be built on a schedule that has certainty. Those are things that come out of the negotiations with developers, especially on larger scale projects. So I think the Article 80 process is sort of, because it's a measurement of impact and then requires developers to say, I'm going to make an investment to mitigate that impact. It's the reason why a lot of the physical improvements you see in areas of growth are happening. So what we hear from citizens is that the things that we're requiring developers to do don't go far enough. And while I don't agree with that contention in most cases, that's certainly what I hear from most citizens. Developers obviously have a different opinion.
My name is Lisa Alexander. I'm one of the new law professors in the law school, and I teach housing law and policy and some other issues. So I have a question about zoning and upzoning. So often in public discourse, in a place like Boston, people sort of say, well, if we can upzone, that will sort of solve problems and the market will miraculously find housing for all people at all different income levels. And I think while that's necessary, it may not be sufficient. And so my question is, what are some of the other things that you all at the agency are thinking about doing to ensure that there's equity as well as these changes come about, so that if there is more development, it's done in a way that empowers local communities, people, and doesn't displace individuals?
So, appreciate the question. So the way I'd answer would be that everything you said about upzoning, except for I certainly have not been a person, and I don't think anyone here has been someone who said that we're automatically going to get sort of a lifting tide supporting all votes. I think upzoning, what upzoning I think is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow private actors to get to have a chance to in our squares and corridors and corners of the city where people are congregating in this close to transit. It means that we'll be able to realize buildings of a higher scale, and because of the city's inclusionary development policy, more of those units are going to have to be dedicated to affordable housing, specifically deed-restricted affordable housing, or access to housing for people who are voucher holders. So it's I think if we have IDP working the way that it has been, and we propose to increase it from 13% to 17% with a 3% increase further to support households who have Section 8 vouchers, what it means is that when we build 100 units in one of our squares and corridors, there'll be 20 units associated with 20 affordable units associated with that project. That's in addition to the individual affordable housing developments we're pursuing around the city. So it's not going to happen just by upzoning. It's only going to happen by upzoning plus other policies that require the production of affordable housing along the way. I'm really interested in accomplishing that, but it's only going to be effective if we effectively link that with not just the affordable housing components, but the proximity to transit and other ways that people are closer to work and closer to the necessities of life. So hopefully that gets to your question.
So I'm also a new professor at the law school. I'm Professor Thomas Mitchell. I'm the director of an initiative called the Initiative on Land, Housing, and Property Rights. So just moved here, so from Texas, and we're actually married. So just drop that. So what are you doing as the city doing to ensure that there is greater participation from disadvantaged groups at multiple sectors in terms of the real estate developers, those who are working on the projects as construction workers, those in the planning department, in addition to what you're doing in terms of seeking stakeholder participation from the communities themselves?
So we have a Builders of Color coalition here in the city that we are directly invested in. Their convening and their facilitation of the group's members talking to one another and engaging directly with our agency. Among other things, my director of DEI is a person who interacts directly and supports that coalition and interacts with its members. I think we, speaking of myself and Chief Dillon, who directs the housing side of the operation, she and I are both very focused on creating more developers of color in the city who are able to do more with their own companies, in addition to trying to get those experienced team members onto teams of developers who are doing larger scale development in the city. So I think that's one way that we're tackling the gap in terms of the participation in the development business and process. I'm hoping to expand that into some of the other professions of the that are affiliated with our work, like R9. So that's a way I want to highlight. I'd also say that I've tried and worked hard to recruit leaders of color in the agency in a range of different technical fields, whether it's planning or urban design. I have my directors of both those are member identify and are members of those of the Latino and African American communities, along with myself. So I take pride in the people we've been able to recruit and the teams we've been able to cultivate. And it's just a priority that needs even more attention here in the office. And that's in addition to the engagement and other things I think that you were alluding to. Probably do maybe 2 more questions before I have to. These community meetings are crazy. In their number, I should say, not in their content.
Chief, thank you so much. My name is Sami Benayad. I'm a junior history major here at BC. I actually wrote a research paper about the BRA and specifically the development of the Southwest Corridor. It's a very remarkably early instance of transit-oriented development. And I just had a question, what are some of the challenges today from a planner's perspective on dealing with these opportunities of TOD?
I'd say that the biggest issues with TOD that I'm seeing right now, and this is probably, I'm going to try not to let this become a hot take on TOD, but I would say that the challenge with TOD right now is good news is a lot of the land is owned by transit authorities or related entities. So that's the good news. And so when you try to assemble a site, you don't have to talk to 50 people about the site assembly. That definitely helps. There's a whole set of issues attending these properties that when you sort of begin to scratch the surface a little bit are literally become very important. So you can scratch the surface and you realize that many of them are effectively brownfields and have site conditions and contaminants that need to be addressed. The second issue you contend with is that often the properties need significant infrastructure enhancement in order to be developable. So if you think about a piece of land that you'd like to develop on, but and maybe you got the land for, because you're a great negotiator, you got the land for a good price. You then have to say, okay, well, what's the price of actually creating developable land in this case? Well, I have to build another road. I have to dig out the first 6 feet of soil and replace it and send it to a lined landfill and replace it with brand new soil in order to develop the property. Your land cost isn't just a function of how much you paid to be the fee simple owner. You've also got to find a way to get it ready to be developed through infrastructure in brownfields. The next challenge would just be permitting processes. Boston has its challenges in getting a permit, but as you're probably reading in the newspaper, many communities around the state are not particularly welcoming to transit-oriented development. There's lots of reasons, but there's lots of reasons, and they're sort of tailored to each neighborhood, but they're affecting to each community, but they're very much affecting our ability to develop. I mean, an example recently in the newspaper where you're learning about South Shore Mall, which has just an enormous amount of parking, not being able to develop consensus about whether they should have housing on the outer parking lots. It sounds like a crazy idea. The proximity to the highway, the proximity to the train, the proximity to shopping and grocery, but yet still not being able to develop a consensus that housing is needed. It can be very confusing. Can I do one more question?
Just a quick question. There are few people in the country that have got your experience from the local level, the state level, the federal level. private sector, public sector. Can you talk a little bit about how those are that range of experiences is influencing your policy making and your job now? And then, if you would, just quickly talk about about a mentor that has supported your direction, your professional thinking.
I have been very fortunate, and I am very appreciative to my mentors. I'll go backwards. Vince Strozer, former developer from Trinity Financial, the mixed income developer, was an early mentor of mine, and taught me a huge amount about how to do development here in Boston. I would say Lowell Richards, another leader from Mass Port Authority, who had previously been an assistant secretary of A&F for the state, sort of the brain trust of the Commonwealth. Carol Gladstone, the developer who worked for Beacon and was a key part of Rose Wharf being developed. Those are three people I could name off the top. I would sort of go further and say I certainly, when I think about people who helped shape me into being the person I am as a professional, I'd also highlight Mayor Anthony Williams and Mayor Mike of Washington and Mayor Mike Duggan of Detroit. Certainly inform my perspective about development and public sector leadership to a huge degree. So those would be a set of mentors and what they did. I could say more about what each of their worldviews. But federal, state, and local, what I'd say is that when you're a federal official, you have to lead through rules and money, and you are sending a message to people about what you want through the budget decisions you make in the aggregate, and the rules that are associated with those funds, and the very small changes in the rules can result in very significant changes in the way that the money's allocated and deployed by communities. But you're very far away from the actual implementation. So if you like that, it's harder to do that work. The state is a nice hybrid between the two, where you are, you're making policy with rules and money, but you also have things that you own that you're a little bit closer to, and then you can make available, especially as it comes to development. And then, when you're a city planner working at the local level, you have you get to be. I was using this analogy with in another presentation for those of you who are electronic music people. You're kind of a remixer. You're kind of a DJ. You layer things together, sounds and other things together in a way that sort of creates something. Now, what's great about that is that I'm going to go back to using an analogy associated with the building industries, is that you have parks and houses and buildings and curb cuts and like all the physical stuff of the city is yours. It belongs to you. People are holding you responsible for it. And so there's a very tight loop between someone not liking it and you hearing about it. Somebody doesn't like something at HUD, they've got to talk to a lot of people before they talk to you. Someone doesn't like something in Boston, they're going to see me in the supermarket and they're going to tell me. And that's what's both fun and challenging about the work, is that you're immediately accountable. And so going back to my DJ analogy is, you're close enough to the audience for you to hear them boo you. So you have to be, they're depending on you to be resourceful and to be responsive. So that's a little bit about each of the three levels of government. I think I like the local level. Professor McCullough and team, it's great seeing you. I got to run to a family meeting, but I really appreciate your time and attention. I'd love to come back another time